이제 기조 강연을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 이 기조 강연은 마르투치 세계보건기구 아시아 태평양 환경보건센터장님께서 준비를 하셨는데요. 환경이 주는 건강 위험과 해결을 위한 국제협력이라는 주제로 해주시겠습니다. 자, 환경과 직업을 연구하는 역학자이십니다. 지금 무대 위로 등단을 하셨는데요. 기와 생태계 파괴 등 인류 이 시대의 시급한 도전 과제에 대한 고찰을 통해서 환경을 위해 결정 요인, 환경 요인과 또 결정 요인이 건강과 건강 형평성에 미친 영향 분석에 연구 역량을 집중하고 계신다고 합니다. 자, 여러분 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Your Excellencies, distinguished participants in this event, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, 안녕하세요. I can't tell you, thank you. I cannot tell you how pleased I am to be addressing you today in this forum. And it's a great honor and privilege to be presenting to you some of the work and the ideas and intentions that we have in the World Health Organization. I bring the greetings from our regional director, Dr. Takeshi Kasai, director of the Western Pacific region of the World Health Organization. And myself, I have the privilege of being the the head of the new office, the Asia Pacific Center for Environment and Health, which is based in Seoul, here in Seoul in Korea. And I've been here for a couple of weeks, not more than that. So we are setting up this office, and we will be working with you to serve the region and the country. The region I'm referring to is the Western Pacific region of WHO. We serve 37 countries and areas. It's a very vast and heterogeneous and vibrant region, including a very large population of close to 2 billion people. Very big diversity across the countries, different problems, different challenges, different resources. And that's the challenging but also very exciting part of our work. Now, I'd like to talk to you today about environment and health, which is our area. And how does the environment affect human health? By now, we have quite a lot of evidence at disposal. We know a lot. Science has been progressing very fast in the last several years and decades, and we know how a series of different factors affect health for good and bad, and we have a strong evidence, scientific evidence base from which to draw and inform policy in the domain. And informing policy in member states is really the core mandate of the World Health Organization at large, and certainly will be the core mandate of the Seoul Center for Environment and Health. Now, in WHO, we like numbers, we like evidence. So my presentation, I'm going to share with you quite a few of these numbers. So bear with me. I am myself an epidemiologist, and we have this way of working where we base our statements and our positions on current available scientific evidence. So globally speaking, the big picture, you see it here in this slide, is that 23% of the global mortality in this case, but also applies to morbidity as well, is due to environmental factors. The Western Pacific region is, because it's so large, is one of the most affected regions across the world. So environmental factors really represent a very important slice in the pie of environmental determinants. Close to a fourth of premature mortality worldwide is due to the environment. This is not even, of course, across the globe. This map shows where the most pressure occurs for the global picture across the world. And of course here the darker the color, the redder the color, the stronger the pressure. And you see this very uneven distribution of the effect of health on people's lives and death, for this matter. So what really drives, I refer to environment as a whole, but what are the main issues when it comes to environment and health and its impact on people's health? Well, air pollution, especially in cities, in the urban environment, is by far the biggest risk factor that we know about. More than half, more or less half of that burden on mortality and morbidity that I showed comes from air pollution in cities. The picture is rather bleak. There is an increasing trend of urbanization. As you know, more and more people going to live in big cities across the world, and Asia is no exception. So air pollution at urban level, when it comes to environment and health, is, in a sense, the number one factor that we can quantify. Air pollution increases mortality, morbidity, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, lung cancer. There is increasing evidence on more and more effects on diabetes or mental health. It affects children, especially respiratory conditions, hospital admissions. It hampers productivity. So we know a lot about air pollution, and we know that the burden is very large. And I referred especially to these chronic non-communicable diseases. And this is, in fact, a very interesting pattern worldwide. We are witnessing a very marked tendency of non-communicable disease, chronic disease, like cardiovascular disease or cancer, that are growing, whereas the red part of this graph, which is communicable vector-borne disease, is decreasing. And the overall burden of disease and quality and length of life expectancy is improving overall. But this trend of non-communicable disease is very visible. It's called also an epidemiological transition. But communicable vector-borne disease is not to be forgotten for sure. This is an example of the distribution of access to drinking water from the pipe at home. And it shows the very wide distribution of this proportion across the countries in our region. So typically vector-borne disease through water is an important issue in some countries, especially where the access to clean drinking water is not everywhere. So certainly vector-borne disease is an issue that must not be forgotten globally and in the Western Pacific region. If you look at estimates of global burden of disease and mortality across the world, there are several estimates, several groups and researchers are spending quite a lot of time doing these estimates. You see what I meant, that air pollution dominates the picture. This graph here compares different assessments, including from WHO and other authoritative sources that are comparable. So different methodologies bring more or less the same results, and that's very reassuring. The evidence is really reinforcing these findings. You see that air pollution dominates. Water is sort of second in this table. And we also have other factors like occupational exposures and soil contamination through chemicals. And this gives you an idea of the relative proportion of these factors. But there's also an important thing to notice that, as I mentioned, these estimates are based on available evidence, and they only refer to factors for which the evidence is strong enough to make these assessments. There are many other factors for which we know less. We know that maybe they're a problem, but we are unable to quantify that. And they are not included in those estimates. So when I refer to the global burden of disease from environmental factors, chances are that that is an underestimate of the real impact, because we are unable to capture quite a lot of other factors. And there's more. In this rapidly changing world, there might be things that we don't know that we don't know. Unknown unknowns that might come up with surprises from the environmental domain that might hit us and reveal that there are more unexpected impacts that we can anticipate. So not everything is fully understood in environment and health. We know a lot. There's a very vibrant research community out there, building more and more evidence and sometimes finding new issues. It has to be remembered that global health, despite the figures that I showed, is actually improving. This is doesn't really work, but the top row indicates increasing health, longer life expectancy across the world on average, and this has come for more and more people. So we have a bigger population worldwide with an improving overall health, extended life expectancy. However, that came at the expenses, or in any case, what's happening in parallel is essentially a deterioration of virtually all macro indicators of the health of ecosystems. Another way of putting it is the notion of planetary boundaries for things like biosphere integrity, land system, freshwater use, ocean acidification. Many of those boundaries have been trespassed. We know that in order for the global community to operate safely, we must stay within those boundaries, and the evidence shows that in many cases those boundaries seem to have been trespassed. So global health on average has been improving, but there is this very worrying picture of essentially collapsing of the life support systems on Earth, which is something that Jeremy Rifkin also referred to in his video message. This is an example of land use, for example, and it shows that out of the available land, habitable land, we are using 77% of that for agriculture for feeding animals. So it's a very inefficient use of land with a precious resource that we are very inefficiently using. And this is one example of many that indicate that these planetary boundaries are being trespassed, and we need very strong action to address those dysfunctional activities. But the main, if we refer to the main indicators, of course, for the health of the planet, temperature and climate change is the main indicator. And these are projections by now very firmly established, especially by the work of the IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change, which indicate that in any reasonable scenario, global temperatures will indeed increase, hopefully not much more than 1.5 degrees, and that's the Paris Agreement. But in other scenarios, like business as usual, the increase would be much more pronounced, and this will bring in phenomenal changes in our lives. So these are the kind of very worrying data and information that we have about the future state of the planet Earth. I'm talking future, but it's already, as also has been said before, climate change is happening, and it's been happening already for a few years. In the Western Pacific region, we witness very tangible effects of climate change, especially when it comes to our countries, the small islands in the Pacific. And these are just examples from extreme weather events in year 2015, so it's already a few years ago. And these events are nowadays occurring periodically. They repeat themselves on an almost regular basis, unfortunately. And these are very impactful events. They wreck entire communities. They destroy lives and livelihoods. So many people around the world are indeed suffering. They've been suffering for a few years now from climate change. Disasters are these kind of disasters statistics show that there is an increasing trend in these extreme weather events impacts, with a very large proportion of extreme weather events in impact on economy, on mortality, on morbidity. This is work of the UN, and it shows that indeed this threat has to be taken very, very seriously. Climate change, this is one statement from WHO, again based on current evidence. Climate change affects everybody. In rural communities, in small islands, as we showed, but also on big cities. Droughts, vector-borne diseases, food production crisis, air pollution, water scarcity and water contamination. The estimate is currently that in status quo, business as usual, we will soon have 250,000 additional deaths per year due to climate change. This is a projection. It will add to that graph that I showed earlier, where you had air, water, and so on. So there's going to be, when the evidence is strong enough, but I think it will come very soon, another big set of bars in that graph, showing that the impact of climate change on health is present, is sizable, and unfortunately is growing. Now, climate change and health has been nowadays studied for quite some time. We know quite a bit about that. It's still a relatively young area of work in environment and health, but it attracted a lot of attention in the scientific community, including some outstanding personalities. And by now we have a rather rich picture of how climate change can affect health. I don't want to take you through that graph. It's just to show that it's a complicated one, where, however, we are aware of the fact that there are direct effects of climate change present, like the one that I showed, extreme weather events. But there are also indirect connections, maybe still unconfirmed, but there is increasing evidence on the effect of climate change, like water and food scarcity, to determine big migrations, to worsen social conflict. So the indirect effect of climate change can really go through very, very important mechanisms: social unrest, conflict, war. So that's the extent to which we should really consider the role of climate change in global health. One theme that deserves a lot of attention is this one of equity. This is an example of some graph that represents the flows of hazardous waste globally. And you see that there is some evidence that shows that there is a flow of production and exporting of toxic and hazardous waste from some countries to others, typically from high-income to low-income countries. So this global inequity is also an important factor whereby one has to consider that the impact of environmental factors is not evenly distributed. We showed that before, but there are also mechanisms that reinforce those inequalities. And I think it's very important that we should address those inequalities, both at global level, like in this case, but also locally. Vulnerable, disadvantaged communities within countries are certainly much more exposed to environmental factors, and they bear a bigger share of the impact, typically. And this has also been documented in many cases across the world. So this is what I've been describing is a rather bleak and daunting picture. But I think it's also important to stress that there is, I think, a very encouraging way forward. We heard before from Jeremy Rifkin about the revolution that he's envisaging. The UN has now been working for a few years on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's a very strong platform which has catalyzed a lot of political interest and support. And it shows, generally speaking, that solutions exist, they are within reach, and they should be based on redefinition of prosperity, on a rather deep change in paradigm and mentality. It's good to see that many countries, like Korea, among others, are giving such a strong support to this transition. So it's a very important change that makes us very hopeful for the future. And I want to mention a couple of examples in this respect. Circular economy is one. Korea has been investing in circular economy, which is an economy where the value of energy and materials is enhanced through use and reuse of them, where it's a sharing economy. And a lot of progress has been made across the world, typically in most industrialized countries like Korea or in Europe, in Western Europe, where indeed has been some models of circular economy are now in place that reduce enormously the impact of human activities on natural resources, on commodities, and they diminish the externalities of activities. So that's a very encouraging trend. And WHO has been working on that too, looking at the health dimension of a transition towards circular economy. Another one I'd like to mention, because we refer to the urban environment and air pollution, is the power of green space in cities. It looks like a small thing, but there's very strong evidence showing how powerful more green space can be for citizens. And we now know about many ways in which health can be positively affected by urban green space, access to good green space in cities. So we have a way forward, and we have also a very promising set of instruments and platforms. The UN and WHO, we've been doing, I think, our homework to prepare consensus, political consensus, scientific evidence, and we now have, I think, a very good basis on which to base our work. Several documents are in place that describe the strategy, the actions, the rationale of what we want to achieve in the coming few years. And in addition, in the Western Pacific region, we have a newly endorsed so-called white paper, a document that points out some key changes in implementation, things like innovation, systems thinking, reach the unreached, this question of inequalities, and an important need to invest in more compelling narrative and stronger communication activities. And this event is really fits that idea in full. The center in Seoul that I am heading, I want to say it's a great opportunity for us. As I mentioned, WHO is extremely grateful, especially to the to the Korean government and through the Ministry of Environment, who's supporting the center. Also, the city of Seoul is supporting the center. And we operate in coordination with a number of regional and global initiatives. So we build on solid foundations, the one I described, and we look forward to working with you all in the near future. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. 감사합니다.